Still on Misphatim. We're a little behind. Hopefully we'll catch up today. Maybe. So we said at Tet, where the Rebbe taught about that, Hashem gives us a halva. He gives us a loan. And the loan is for spending. Because a monetary loan is for spending. If you give somebody a loan of an object, he has to give you back the exact same object. But if you give him a loan of money, so the money was meant to be spent. So he says what Hashem gives us in this world is for spending. So you don't have to give it back at any given moment. He said the most important thing that Hashem gave us is that He gave us the precious stone in His crown. And what's the precious stone in His crown? That's the mashal that the Alter Rebbe used to explain what Chassidus is. He says you have to feel, and this is why it's called Havdalah, that even if you're not complete, if you're not perfect, and he goes from the light to the difficult. He says, you missed something in Likutei Sofrim or Hidur Mitzvah. And then he says, maybe you missed something in a Derabanan, or maybe even a Doraisa, or maybe even completely didn't do things that you were supposed to do, and so on. That has no bearing at all on learning Chassidus. That Chassidus, even though it's the highest part of the Torah, you don't need to be perfect in order to engage in it. In fact, the opposite is true. And then he explained that the reason for this is that the loan is not based on merit. The same way that we don't give loans on merit. Im kesef taveh et ami. So he said, "You're my people." And my people is, even though theoretically you should give loans to everyone. It doesn't matter if he's a Jew or not. But the Torah has a special stipulation that says that first of all you give to a Jew, then you can give to others. So that thing is not a meritorious criteria. It's not based on merit. Because the Jew didn't do anything more than the non-Jew. He's not, again, as opposed to what people think. He says the same thing is true by learning Chassidus. That Hashem gives it to people not on the basis of merit. He loans it out not on the basis of merit. And then he says the final thing is that when Hashem needs to collect the loan back, so there's a halacha, lo tiyeh lo kenoshe. You shouldn't be like a oppressor, a repossession man, a repo man. That you go and you try to, take it out of his clutches, whatever he has.
It's called an oppressor.
Yeah, an oppressor, that's what they call it in England?
Yeah.
There's no such thing in America.
No, oppressors are
so So Hashem sees that if you don't have, on the contrary, He gives you more. Sometimes the only way to get somebody out of a rut is to help them even more. So all this is what the Baal Shem Tov called separation. Why is it separation? Because separation always, so I shouldn't seek high levels of learning, of spirituality, whatever it is. They also do the same thing with the friend you just told me about. The person thinks that he's not anything special.
A garnished.
He's a garnished. But it's not just that. He has a lot of averas. He has a lot of problems. So then he comes and he says, but because I'm like that, I don't need to go daven. Because why would Hashem even hear me? Why would He? And this is the most common problem in the world. And by the way, that's why a lot of people give to Chabad houses. Why? Because they do the same problem, unfortunately, that exists and started maybe in Christianity, but that you get someone else to be your holy man.
Yeah, conscience servant.
What do you say?
Conscience servant.
Yeah. What a conscience servant?
Solvent. I have a bad conscience, so
Yeah.
solve the problem. I give you money.
Yeah.
You're religious.
And then, what's it called? Indentures? I don't remember what it's called.
That's dentistry, right?
Not dentures. What do they call it? I don't remember.
Indentured servant.
No. So they have a different name for it. I don't remember. They used to sell these. In the church, they used to sell it. What it was called? I don't remember what it's called. They sold you good acts. You didn't do anything yourself. So give me money, and I'll give you back. They used to have a contract.
Hey,
It's like you did.
can I get in on this?
So unfortunately, people feel that way. And why do they feel that way? Because they say, I'm not a good person. I can't do these things. And that's where Havdalah, separation, comes out. Separation says you have to push away, you have to separate yourself from your negative self-image. You have to separate that out. You have to say, Hashem wants the divine soul in me. That's what He wants. It's true that I have these problems. Someday I'll take care of them. Maybe I won't, but I'll do tshuva over them. I'll say I regret it. That's also enough. But don't sell yourself short with that excuse. It becomes an excuse over time. And first the person really feels guilty. That's why guilt is the avi avos satuma. Okay? Guilt is the worst possible thing in the world. What's guilt? How do you say guilt in Hebrew?
Interesting question.
No, it's not hard. Ashma, rigshe ashma. But that's not the original word. The original word is what Chazal say in Sukkah, that the Yetzer Hara had 7 names. And one of them is Hatzfoni, which literally means the one from the north. But that's not what it means there. It means they're Hatzafun, the one that's hidden. So that's what it meant originally. But in modern Hebrew, the way you say a conscience, like when you say a guilty conscience, that's the word matzpun. You've heard this word. Right? A matzpun sheli lo noten li.
I don't have one.
Yeah, you don't have one. In fact, it's very interesting that it was Hitler who accused the Jews of inventing the conscience. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very interesting thing. It's like he didn't have a conscience. And that was the thing, when you ask what was his true hatred of the Jewish people, it was the Jews are always doing a reckoning. Always doing a cheshbon nefesh. Unfortunately, now this is not related to Hitler. That was his problem with Yiddishkeit, and he had none. So, it causes something of a problem, because basically I imagine that somewhere along the line, very early in his childhood, he met some Jew. He said to him, "What are you? You're not a human being? You don't have a conscience?" It's like, what do you mean? Where did this come from? So, in his strange, warped mind, it became that Judaism is what gave the world the conscience. He accused Freud of it. It doesn't matter; it's all nonsense. But in the end, this conscience, this Likutei Ashma, is the Yetzer Hara. Now, why is that? A person should have a conscience. There's different types of conscience. What we mean by conscience is that a person has guilt feelings. That is the worst thing in the world. That will be his destruction. You can't have guilt feelings. What do you do when you did something wrong? What does the Torah say you do? You do tshuva right away. You come and you say, Hashem, Hashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Divalnu, Dofi, and if you don't like that nusach, so you say, Hashamti, Bagadati, Gazalti, Divalti, Dofi. You don't have to say with everyone else. I'm not like David HaMelech. The moment that he heard that he was wrong, he raises up his hands and he says, Chatati l'Hashem. That's the only way to get rid of the guilt. Because if you carry guilt around, it will bury you. Because you can't carry guilt around. I've seen guilt destroy people. Literally, mamish destroy them. I have a story that I always tell in this respect, but we don't have time. So some other time I'll tell you about it. It's one of the most powerful examples of how guilt destroys someone. You have to be clean. You have to go to bed clean. You have to clean yourself, cleanse yourself. So that's the Havdalah. That's the separation. Let's continue on, Tetvav. So now we're coming to the third part. The third part is Zamtaka. So it's the sweetening. במדרש תנחומא נאמר ביחס לפסוק, אם כסף תביא את עמי את העני עמך, שזו הלוואה לקדוש ברוך הוא, מלווה השם חונן דל. על ידי זה שהאדם חונן דל בנתינת הצדקה הוא מלווה הוויה, הוא מלווה הוויה. So what was he saying here? That by giving to someone who's poor, you're giving a loan to Hashem. Because basically Hashem was supposed to give him the money. But he gave it to me, and now I'm giving it. So I'm like the loaner. I'm the one who's giving the loan. But it's like I'm giving a loan from Hashem. Because it's all from Hashem. So how does Hashem return? HaKadosh Baruch Hu mishalem lefi midato shelo. But when Hashem pays you back, He doesn't pay you in the currency that you paid. Ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu bli gvul, v'hu mishalem bli gvul. Because Hashem is infinite. So when Hashem pays you back, He pays back an infinite amount. Not what you gave. It's something completely different. Sorry, but you have to ask a question. What do you mean Hashem pays back infinitely? I mean, I gave $100, let's say, for a loan. Is he going to give me back $1 million infinite dollars?
Giving you other things.
So this is a question. We have to have this in back. What exactly does this mean? So he says like this. To understand this point, he doesn't have the question here, but that's the question. This was in, I don't know what year. לגבי העניין שהצמח צדק מסביר בספר החקירה בתחילתו, שאם כי בלי גבול בפועל אינו קיים בנבראים, משום שאף אם יתווסף עוד ועוד יישאר הדבר סוף סוף בהגבלה. So tzemach tzedek has a book of philosophy called Sefer HaChakira. And there he asks the question, how can there be Ein Sof Besof? How can there be the infinite within the finite? Because the finite cannot contain the infinite. So even if Hashem were to try to give infinite in the sense of more quantity, that wouldn't work. Because he'd have to give more and more and more and more. There would be no end to it. And a being who's finite, like us, cannot accept more and more and more. We can't accept without end. We just don't know what to do with it. Not that we don't know what to do. There's no way for us to contain something that's quantifiably infinite. So therefore, so instead, what does Hashem give? How does Hashem give the infinite? He gives it in the potential, not in the actual. He can't give you quantitatively an infinite amount, but he can give you potential infinity. How does that work? So he says like this, sometimes you get $100, and this $100, it goes a long way. It goes much, much further than any $100 you've ever had. You don't understand how. It just propagates. It never finishes. It's sort of like, the Baba Sali's, the myth about the Baba Sali and giving mashke. That because it was covered, you couldn't see how much, so you can pour more and more and more and more and more. So there's no, it's not really infinite. But because you can't see it, the whole idea is that you're not seeing the actual, then you're going for the potential. When you're going for the potential, it could propagate for a long, long time. So now, a little bit more deeply. Something that's finite, so what do you see? You see that it begins to end the moment it starts. The moment you start taking from the bottle, it's no longer the moment you open the cap. So the bottle's not, it's weakened, it's not full anymore. There's a saying, Hanivraim miyom hibara'am olchim u'mityabshim. Says the Rambam. And he has here a very nice note on it. Bamin means that, like us, that our existence is finite. And even
start to die on the day we're born.
the baby, here he said it nicely, but the original quote that was in philosophy was the baby begins to dry out the moment it's born. So why did he have this note? Because there are beings, at least according to Chazal, there are beings that do not dry out. Who's infinite? So they usually point to the Galgalim, to the orbits of the stars, or the nefesh of the stars, as they call it. מזה מובן שההשפעה שבמשך זמן רב ואין בה כל רפיון, ואדרבה, הרי מגדרי אין סוף בפועל. זה כלל העניין שהמשכה בלי גבול בגבול. So he says there is such a thing that it continues to give. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It doesn't end. Rifyon, there's no weakness in it. Rifyon is like to be rafez, to be relaxed. There's no relaxation in it. That's why the ancients, they identified the movement of the stars as being something that's infinite. Why? Because you don't see them slow down. So they even went so far as to say that the only type of motion that never weakens, that doesn't suffer from friction, from loss, is circular motion. And by the way, it's very interesting that modern physics has gone back full circle to that today. There's this idea that spin in particles is something that doesn't have, the angular momentum doesn't need energy. it never slows, it never changes. It's constant. And so they had to change the whole concept of motion, even though angular momentum there is not exactly that it's moving, but there is a change in the particle, which we can measure. So they had to change the definition so that this type of circular motion would be the natural state of the particle. That nothing starts. Tzedakah is, and he repeats this many times, is the consummate example of all the mitzvahs. It's like an inclusive, all-inclusive mitzvah. And it's even divided into different levels, and the highest level is called milus chasadim. It's to do kindness. Why is it higher? Because tzedakah you can only give to someone who's poor. But milus chasadim, to do acts of loving kindness, you can do whether someone is poor or rich. It doesn't matter. בגלל הצדקה חייב הרי להיות עשיר ועני, שכן לא היו כל העשירים חסד באמת מה ננצרו, ולא יחדל אביון מקרב הארץ. אבל בגלל גמילות חסדים אין צורך בעני. Says, what's the big difference though? That if we need to perform the mitzvah of tzedakah, they have to be poor people. Because you can't do tzedakah without poor people. But milus chasadim, which is the higher form of tzedakah, you don't need to have poor people. Everybody can be rich, and you can still do milus chasadim. You can still do acts of loving kindness. So you see in that milus chasadim is a much higher level. אפס כי לא יהיה בך אביון, שכן גמילות חסדים הוא גם לעשירים. So we could actually come to the state of the entire world being rectified, everybody having everything they need, and you could still do milus chasadim. What would be called tzedakah? It would be called milus chasadim. Okay, so what do we see here? That there's no limits. The milus chasadim is even higher than tzedakah in the sense that when you in kesef talveh tami, that's not tzedakah. Okay, I told you, I had this friend who told me sometimes when you give a loan, to remain sane and to not ruin your relationship with someone, when you go back home, move it from the loan column to the tzedakah column. Right away, you're never going to see this back. So tzedakah, write it off as tzedakah. But that's not true, because a loan is a loan. It's not tzedakah. It's not the same thing. You just do it because you want to feel better. But a loan is milus chasadim. Really, what is a loan? A loan is doing somebody an act of kindness because you expect them to give it back. It's still a tremendous act of kindness. Who are the biggest people who do milus chasadim in the world today? Apparently the banks. Strange, but apparently that's why they're still around, because they still do it. Otherwise, why would such thieves be around? Because they do a terrible sin of interest. But they still do a lot of milus chasadim. It's a very strange thing. In any case, so you see that milus chasadim is by the loan. So the loan, that's what he means. He's saying, you see in different ways that because it's like milus chasadim, because it's like an act of kindness, then there's no barriers here. And the infinite will come down in this thing. Because you can propagate. So what you're saying is like the loan can propagate on and on and on forever. It doesn't end. And what Hashem gives you back from the loan is also the same way. It just continues on and on. You don't have to have if someone who's poor and somebody. Usually, when you say that something weakens, you're saying that it becomes poor. And here it says no. The loan, the gemilut chasadim, is a state of there being plenty everywhere. Nothing is lost, but you can still do gemilut chasadim. So now he has a little thing that was there in the Farbrengen. Alalia mitkayemet harei asafat chevra gemilut chasadim shomrei Shabbat. I'll skip this. וכשם שהם בגמילות חסדים הגבלות של עניים ועשירים, and just as in גמילוס חסדים there are no limitations on there being poor people and rich people בקשר ללווים as far as the loaners are concerned, כך אין צריכות להיות הגבלות בקשר למשתתפים, לכן על כל אחד ואחד לתת לקופה זו. So he says in the same way everybody can partake in whatever they were doing that evening. דבר זה מתאים לפרשת שקלים ונקראת היום, הרי ידוע הפתגם של אמור זקן שיש לחיות עם הזמן עם קריאת התורה של זמן זה, שבמחצית השקל ישתתפו כל ישראל. There's a mistake here. So what do we get? This is sweetening. Sweetening in general means that the infinite appears within the finite. When we talk about the world sweetening, that, for instance, the simple thing in the psyche is that everything that I put aside in separation, I said I have all these problems. I have this problem with my animal soul, and I do this avera and that avera, and I put that aside in order to learn Chassidus. Now I'm in the world of the Rebbeim, and now in the world of holiness. Said I put that aside, but eventually what? Animal soul is just going to sit there and wither away. Sweetening is when the animal soul, you go back to it, and suddenly you realize that the animal soul can be a vehicle for holiness. It's not like in separation. In separation, you completely ignore it. You have to ignore it in the beginning. If you don't ignore it, you'll never be able to hold on to the holiness. But once you've held on to the holiness, you identify with the holiness, you can come back to the animal soul and elevate it. That's called sweetening. And then what happens? The animal soul becomes the vehicle for the infinite. It's interesting. The divine soul is not the vehicle for the infinite. This is something that he doesn't discuss here, but he discusses in many other places. In Tanya it says that Hashem could not reveal his true essence, his true infinite essence, in all the spiritual worlds. He had to skip over them and come all the way down to the physical reality. And not just any physical reality, our physical reality with all its problems. That's the only place that can contain the infinite. And that's called sweetening. How does that happen? Okay, so that needs more explanation. But in life, what that means is that Olam Haba, when we talk about the world to come, we learned the Maimer from the Rebbe. That's the world of infinite, of infinity, an eternal reality. And we said that even when you do a mitzvah in this world, you should feel every time, what am I doing? I'm preparing my infinite reality. And that's why Olam Haba is not like some kind of, we're deferring the reward to trick you into doing things. No. You should do things with the consciousness that what I am doing is I am preparing my world to come. Not the world to come of the neshama. That's a finite world. I'm preparing the world to come of the body, when the body becomes infinite. Leave it at that.
What happened to the story?
We have time? We don't have time.